This is my set. Shoot the damn scene or get out. The slap lasted less than a second. One open palm moving fast, connecting with the left side of her face, hard enough to make everyone in the room flinch. The sound cut through the noise of the set like a gunshot. Sharp, wet, unmistakable. And in the silence that followed, nobody moved. Not the camera operators, not the lighting crew, not the assistant directors, or the production assistants, or the dozen actors standing on their marks 10 feet away. 62 people on that sound stage. And every single one of them went completely, absolutely still. The woman who had been struck standing tall in her costume, her jaw tight, her eyes clear, looked at the man who had done it. She did not cry. She did not stumble backward. She did not raise her hand to her face. She looked at him the way someone looks at a problem they already know how to solve. And she said quietly enough that only the people nearest to her could hear it. "You will be held accountable for this." Then she turned and walked off the sound stage. Within 45 minutes, a video of the incident was already being shared. Within an hour, her husband had seen it. And within 24 hours, 600 motorcycles were rolling into the city. Her name was Diane Reeves. Not the jazz singer, though people made that joke often enough that she had learned to smile at it without actually finding it funny. This Diane Reeves was an actress, 38 years old, with 2 Screen Actors Guild nominations and 1 Independent Film Award that she kept on the shelf above her fireplace. Not because it was the most prestigious thing she had ever won, but because her mother had been alive to see her accept it. She had come up the long way theater in her early 20s. Small television roles through her late 20s, a supporting part in a crime drama that people still quoted at her in grocery stores, and then somewhere in her mid-30s. The industry had caught up to what audiences had known for years. She was exceptional. She had the rare ability to make a scene feel inevitable, to inhabit a character so completely that watching her work felt less like watching acting and more like watching a person simply live. Directors wanted her because she brought something to a set that money could not manufacture, a kind of genuine presence that made every frame feel true. She was also, by every account from every crew member and co-star who had ever worked with her, extraordinarily professional. She knew her lines. She arrived on time. She prepared with the discipline of someone who understood that preparation was a form of respect for the material, for the crew, for the audience that would eventually sit in the dark and trust the story being told to them. She listened. She did not cause problems. She did not demand things that were not in her contract. She treated the catering staff and the camera operators with the same courtesy she extended to producers and studio executives. This was not a performance of niceness. It was simply who she was, the product of a childhood in which she had been taught that how you treated people when nothing was at stake told you everything about who you actually were. The film that brought her into contact with the director was a period drama set in the late 1960s. A story about a woman navigating the music industry at a time when the music industry was particularly brutal to women and particularly brutal to black women. It was exactly the kind of role that Diane had been waiting years to play. Layered, complex, demanding, historically grounded. When the offer came, she read the script twice in one sitting. She read it a third time with a highlighter. She had her attorney review the contract carefully over the course of several days, not because she distrusted the production company specifically, but because she had learned long before that trust without documentation was simply hope. And hope was a luxury that black actresses in Hollywood could not routinely afford. There were specific provisions in the final agreement about which scenes she would perform, what content was included, and what required her explicit written consent before being added. She signed because she trusted the material. What she had not fully accounted for was the man who would be directing it. Marcus Webb had been making Hollywood films for 26 years. He had a reputation that preceded him into every room he entered. Not always a flattering one, but an undeniably powerful one. His films made money. They won awards. They attracted major talent. And they were made under conditions that the people who had worked on them described in private in very specific terms. Webb was the kind of director who believed that the set was his kingdom and that every person on it existed to serve his vision. This was not entirely unusual in Hollywood. The industry had a long and well-documented history of directors who confused creative authority with absolute authority. But Webb operated at an extreme that most of his peers did not. He rewrote dialogue on the morning of filming without notice. He demanded additional scenes that had not been discussed in pre-production. He publicly criticized actors in front of the full crew when their performances did not meet whatever shifting standard he had set for that particular day. He had a habit of testing people, pushing at their limits, looking for the edge, and when he found it, pushing further. The people who had survived his sets and gone on to work with him again were without exception people who had learned to absorb whatever he threw at them without reaction. Webb interpreted silence as difference. He interpreted difference as respect, and he interpreted respect as permission to go further. It was a closed loop, self-reinforcing and self-justifying, and it had worked for him for more than 2 decades because the system around him had chosen repeatedly and deliberately to let it work. His budgets came in close enough. His films received enough awards attention. His name attracted enough talent, and so the system had year after year decided that the cost of confronting him was higher than the cost of tolerating him. Diane was not that kind of person. She was not hostile or aggressive, but she had a clearly defined sense of what she would and would not do. And she had the contractual documentation to back it up. She had also spent 15 years in an industry that regularly asked black women to accept things that it would not ask of anyone else. And she had a finely calibrated sense of where those lines were and why they existed. From the first week of production, she and Webb had circled each other carefully. He tested. She declined politely and professionally. He pushed. She pointed to her contract. He found other ways to apply pressure. She absorbed the pressure without capitulating. For 4 weeks, they maintained an uneasy equilibrium. The crew watched, the other cast members watched. Everyone was aware that something was building. The way you are aware of weather changing before you can name what the change will be. Then came the morning of the 5th week when everything broke. Webb arrived on set that morning with new pages. This happened often enough that the crew had developed a kind of resigned ritual around it. The new pages were distributed, everyone adjusted, and filming proceeded with whatever had been added or changed. But the pages that morning contained something different. There was a scene not in the original script, not discussed in any pre-production meeting, not covered in Diane's contract that required her to perform in a way that was explicitly humiliating. The scene was framed as dramatically necessary, but the necessity was thin, and the humiliation was specific, and Diane recognized it immediately for what it was. She read the pages once, standing at the edge of the sound stage with the hum of the lights above her. She set them down on an equipment case beside her. She found Webb and told him calmly and directly that she would not be filming the new scene. Webb looked at her for a long moment. His expression was the expression of a man who was deciding what kind of problem she was going to be. Then he told her that every actor on his set followed his direction. She told him that every actor on his set also had a contract. He told her that this was his production and that the vision was his and that what he needed from her was compliance. She told him again that the scene was not in her contract and that she would not perform it. He told her that she was being difficult. She told him that she was being professional. The argument escalated in increments. The way arguments on film sets tend to neither party retreating, both parties aware of the audience around them, the crew pretending not to listen while listening with complete attention. The tension in the room was physical. You could feel it pressing against the air, tightening the space between people who would have preferred to be anywhere else. Webb's voice got louder. His face changed color. He said things that several crew members would later describe as threatening. He accused Diane of undermining his authority, of disrespecting his process, of behaving in ways that were unacceptable on his set. He used language that he did not use with his other actors. The crew noticed this. Some of them exchanged looks and then stopped exchanging looks because exchanging looks was also a form of action, and nobody on that set wanted to be the first person to take an action. Diane stood her ground. She did not match his volume. She did not use his language. She simply kept returning with the patience of someone who had prepared for exactly this scenario to the same point. The scene was not in her contract, and she was not going to film it. And then Webb stepped forward, and he hit her. The cameras were rolling. This was important. Not the official production cameras, which had been paused during the argument, but the secondary cameras that are always running on a film set, the cameras that capture the backstage footage and the behind-the-scenes material, and the production diary content that ends up in making of documentaries and press packages. Those cameras saw everything. They captured the movement of his arm, the angle of his approach, the moment of contact, the sound, and they captured Diane's face in the seconds. Immediately after the shock, quickly mastered, replaced by something cooler and more deliberate. They captured her words. They captured her exit. And within an hour, someone with access to that footage had made a decision. And the footage was outside the walls of the production company and moving through the world at a speed that nothing in the 1960s, the decade the film was meant to depict, could have predicted or contained. The video ran for 2 minutes and 14 seconds. It showed the final moments of the argument and then the slap and then Diane's response and then her departure. By the time it had been circulating for 3 hours, it had been seen by several hundred people. By the time it had been circulating for 6 hours, the number was in the millions. Journalists were calling the production company's press office. Lawyers were being consulted. Agents and managers across the industry were having urgent telephone conversations with each other and with their clients. The Screen Actors Guild had issued a preliminary statement expressing concern. And by the time Diane's husband, a man named Ray Garrett, saw the video for the first time, sitting in his office at the back of the third garage in a chain of 6 that he owned and operated across the greater metropolitan area. It had already become the kind of thing that people were talking about everywhere. It had become, as these things do in the age of instant distribution, a moment. And moments Ray understood from long experience needed to be handled correctly because moments that were handled incorrectly became something else entirely. Ray Garrett was not a man who appeared often in the public record attached to his wife's name. He was mentioned occasionally in profiles of Diane described as her husband of 9 years, a businessman, privately held, low profile. The journalists who had tried to write about him in any depth had not found much to write about that he was willing to confirm. He ran a successful chain of automotive service shops. He also owned 3 bars, modest places, neighborhood institutions, the kind of establishments where people knew each other by name, and the drinks were poured without ceremony. And the football game on the television in the corner was the same game that had been on the television in that corner for 30 years. He was not an actor. He was not in the industry. He attended the events that a man attends when he is married to a public figure and cares about his wife's life. And he smiled in the photographs and he shook the hands. And then he went back to his garages and his bars and his other life. The one that the profiles could not quite pin down because the people who could have told them about it were not in the habit of speaking to journalists and because the people who wrote the profiles had not been asking quite the right questions. Ray Garrett was the president of a motorcycle club with chapters in 11 states. He had held that position for 7 years. Before that, he had held other positions in the same organization, sergeant-at-arms, vice president, road captain, working his way through the structure over the course of a decade and a half with the same methodical patience that characterized everything else he did. The club had 640 members across its active chapters. And the culture of the club was built on a specific code. Loyalty, order, accountability, and the absolute obligation to stand for the people you claimed as yours. Ray had not hidden this from Diane when they met. He had told her exactly who he was and what his life was before he asked her to share it. He had been honest in a way that she later described as both unusual and necessary. The kind of honesty that only means something when it costs the person offering it something real. She had taken 2 weeks to think about it, to sit with what it meant, to talk to the people whose judgment she trusted about what a life with a man like Ree would actually look like. And then she had called him and told him that she was in 9 years of marriage had not changed either of them. It had only deepened the mutual understanding of who the other person was. When Ray watched the video, he did not watch it once. He watched it 4 times. The way a person watches something they need to fully understand before they respond to it, each viewing slower than the last. His attention moving to different parts of the frame, cataloging what was there. Then he sat for a while without moving. The office was quiet. Outside through the glass, he could hear the sounds of the garage tools, engines, voices, the ordinary percussion of a working day. He let the sounds be there without paying them any attention. Then he called Diane. She answered on the second ring, her voice steady, and he asked her the only question that mattered at that moment. "Are you hurt?" She told him she was not. He told her he was glad. Then he said with the simplicity that characterized most of what he said when he meant it most, "Nobody touches him." There was a pause and then Diane said, "I know." She had known before she left the soundstage. She had known because she knew her husband and she knew the difference between what he was capable of and what he would choose. And she had in 9 years of watching him make choices developed the kind of absolute faith that is only available to people who have seen another person tested and not found them wanting. Within 30 minutes of that call, Ray had 3 other calls in progress. One with an attorney who specialized in entertainment law and workplace liability, one with a crisis communications firm whose managing partner owed Ray a very large and long-standing favor, and one with the presidents of the 3 chapters of his club that were geographically closest to the city where Diane's film was being produced. The 4 conversations were very different in content, but identical in direction. The attorney was going to document everything, file formal complaints with the Screen Actors Guild, submit a written demand to the production company, and depending on what the law could support, pursue civil action. The communications firm was going to make sure that the right story reached the right people in the right order and that the story stayed on what had happened in that soundstage and did not drift to anything else. And the chapter presidents were going to organize something that Ree described on that call with a very specific word. He called it a presence, not a threat, not an action, not a demonstration in the sense that the word usually carries its political weight, a presence. And he was specific on that call about exactly what that presence would and would not include. Ree was specific about this because he understood something that a man of his position learns over years of making consequential decisions under real pressure. Violence or even the credible threat of violence would hand the director a weapon that Webb's legal team would use with devastating efficiency. The story would shift from what Webb had done to what Ray's people had threatened. Webb would become a man under siege. Diane would become incidental to her own story. The narrative that the communications firm was carefully placed